Alright, this is going to be a patch 7.3 rundown. I previously did do a patch 7.2 rundown, but the video never ended up making it onto YouTube because the upload kept failing, and then eventually I just gave up on trying to do it. But this is patch 7.3, so this is the patch that comes after the lethality patch, and what we're expected to see inside of this patch is the removal of the problems that a lot of players are experiencing in competitive with Rengar, Camille, and Leblanc, but maybe they'll be hit later on. And then there's also the changes to Malzahar and Zyra, who are two of the most dominant support picks. So we're just going to address everything. And also, I'm unsure, but this might be the last patch notes that Skazard is a part of. And so this is actually really sad. He's one of the riders that is extremely open to the public, and it's going to be a great loss to actually see him go. So we'll make this a good patch rundown. So, all right. Camille, Q empowered damage down, W down, E stun decreased, E attack speed only granted if a champion is hit. Okay, so precision protocol changed from 100% to 80% empowered cast damage. So this is more so big in a sense of when she begins to trade with you later on, when players have multiple items and the extended trades end up taking place. I don't think this is really that big early on because in competitive, Camille isn't winning the lane straight up 1v1. We've seen Camille picked a few times in LCK. I'm unfamiliar with how often she's been picked in NA and EU, but for the majority of her kills that she's gotten in LCK, they've usually been accompanied with a jungler or at the very later stages of the game. So this nerf is interesting, but I don't think that it really is what is making Camille as good as she is. So now W tactical sweep, now decays fully to 0% over the duration, slow 90 to 80%, okay? That doesn't really do anything. The slow decreasing is not something that makes her brutal inside of the 1v1, and it's also not something that makes it so that she's incapable of sticking on you later on, and that's primarily just because of her cooldowns. And apparently I have to lower the volume on my phone so that it does not get picked up. I am super sorry for that. E hookshot, cost 50 mana to 70 mana, stun duration 1 second to 0.75 seconds, now only granted if Camille hits an enemy champion. The fact that it's only granted now if it hits an enemy champion is really nice because it removes her ability to stall maybe in a 1v2 for her jungler to get into position if she doesn't want to commit to the stun early on. And then obviously this is going to impact her other presence in terms of if she's going to be a jungler or a support, where sometimes she misses the champion but she stays on and continues the extended trade inside of a gank. But the cost going from 50 to 70, I'm unsure how problematic that is because I'm not exactly certain how often she does use the hook shot inside of the lane. What we could be looking at is that this is now costing her 60 to 80 more mana, in which case, depending on runes and masteries, this can easily just be fixed via certain mastery changes. So this isn't the end of the world for her at all. Our Hextech Ultimatum no longer persists for its full remaining duration after Camille dies, now dissipates within 1 second after Camille dies. This isn't problematic at all. So the final verdict that I have on the Camille changes is that this doesn't remove her from pro play and that she's still an unholy abomination. The reason that Camille is inside of pro play is, number one, she can be played in 4 roles. She can be played in top, mid, jungle, and support. Her base damages are too high. Her versatility is too high. Her gap close, disengage, etc. is too high. Her isolation is too high. She has a goddamn immunity on her R, where she can dodge skill shots if she's really good at it. And then she has a lockout that also follows. And I think that we actually got to see that today in LCK's match previously. And today is February 8th in Korea, so February 7th, week 4 of LCK. We saw Camille have an interaction with her ultimate that was very similar to Warwick, where it follows despite the person flashing. So her ultimate is just absolutely busted. These changes and these nerfs are almost laughable if they think that this is the type of thing that is going to enable her to be in pro play. If you need any sort of an example on how busted Camille is, you can watch Team MVP in LCK actually get the Camille fall behind to a Kennen early on, and then you can just see what Camille does to Kennen despite being far behind once Camille has 2 items. And then today you can also watch Camille versus Shen that happened in the LCK, and you can just see what Shen, a champion that's designed, or not designed, but intended to counter her, ends up doing against her once Camille has 2 or 3 items. And these changes are not going to address that problem, and it doesn't make anything any more problematic, because some of these changes are also able to just be completely circumvented when you factor in the presence of a jungler. Because realistically in pro play, ganks are not normally supposed to, or not ganks, but kills are not normally supposed to occur in a solo queue, or not a solo queue, but a solo kill setting. And generally it's via the jungler interacting with the lane in some manner and setting it up for you, in which case overkill ends up happening. Yes, maybe there's going to be instances where people get away, with very slight amount of HP, and obviously these changes would technically play a part in it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't address the major problems that is Camille, and so I predict that she will continue to still be banned, and that this won't have any sort of an impact on her. Ivern. Now this is a very interesting champion. I played a lot of Ivern a few months ago. A lot of people might know. I also have the guide out on Ivern. And through all of my playing of Ivern and also discussing with some of the best junglers in Korea on Ivern's ability in pro play, most notably I actually had a very long discussion with Dandy, which was on stream on, where does Ivern fall in pro play. And the general consensus was that due to Ivern's lack of terrain scaling, it would forever put Ivern in a tier where he was hovering on S- and A+, and he would only be able to be picked situationally because he needs synergy with his team compositions. He's not a versus all jungler. And I think that when Riot initially tried to nerf Ivern, the problems were initially able to be worked around via masteries. So for instance, you would put points into meditation to mitigate the mana increase. And that I feel like the problems that were assessed or basically evaluated on what was causing Ivern to be so problematic was incorrect. I think that the main problem was actually Daisy having 419 MS. Because 419 MS at level 6, approaching any sort of a lane, is just going to outspeed anyone, and even if they're using flash, it's going to be likely that Daisy can still get on top of them. The slow was virtually negligible. It does play an impact if you do end up maxing the E on Ivern, but in the later stages of the game, the length at which Daisy lasts and just the obnoxiousness that is Ivern inside of a team fight because of the low cooldown abilities, the max CDR, and because of how Ivern itemizes, which, I guess we can talk about in a second here, is what really causes Ivern to be problematic. So, removed health regeneration. Daisy no longer regenerates 3% maximum health per second while out of combat. This is really, really, really big, because a lot of things that you could do was because of how long she ends up living, you just tank a turret, you throw her away, you keep spamming trigger seeds on her, and then you have her come back in at full HP. And you could also do this with neutral objectives, and it caused, a lot of problems sometimes for teams that were trying to sustain against an Ivern when an Ivern team was trying to push down objectives or capture objectives or siege, whatever. So now, armor and magic resistance, 2060 to 120 to 1540 and 90. So the most problematic part of Ivern is going to be the level 6. I think that the level 11 is virtually negligible, and when we're talking about 20 armor and magic resistance on Daisy, that's not really going to be too much of a problem. Late game, though, I think that missing the 30 MR and magic resistance when champions are having 4 and 5 items, that is a little bit bigger than us talking about a level 11 jungler and his pet, missing a cloth armor and almost a null magic mantle, or a little bit more than a cloth armor and almost a null magic mantle. So all work and all play, Daisy will no longer start attacking the ground and teleporting out of control. That's really, really good. Invisible daisies, Daisy will no longer become invisible in rare circumstances. Well, that's a nice little bug fix. I still don't think that this really addresses the problem that Ivern poses, and I think that Ivern is more so a competitive jungler rather than a solo queue jungler. And so while some of these changes affect solo queue, I don't think that it really impacts Ivern's standing inside of a competitive format. And I think that the changes still don't really address what Ivern's problems can be when Ivern does get out of control. It's also really important to remember that Ivern is also a byproduct of the meta in some ways, in the sense that Ivern's itemization path and the items that he's really, really good with are extremely cost efficient, and he also makes extremely good work of the recipe components building into those items. For instance, Chalice is extremely powerful on Ivern. The Forbidden Idol is extremely powerful on Ivern. Crystalline Bracer, when you're building into Redemption, extremely cost efficient and powerful on Ivern, mostly because of his passive. And when you look at a lot of other junglers, they don't have these sort of interactions with just the recipe items to the same degree that Ivern does. And so because Ivern can hit a full game build at 3 items, and the fact that his 3 items are considerably cheaper than other junglers because he also has the luxury of being able to circumvent going a jungler item, it ends up creating a really big problem where Ivern shows up either with Redemption or Athene's Unholy Grail around the time the opposing jungler is completing their jungler item. And when you compare, what is more impactful, obviously Ivern having those items is going to be a lot more dangerous. And it just makes things extremely awkward. And then in the later stages of the game, with the brushes, it makes it very frustrating to play against. So anyways, in the end, I think that Ivern leaves much to be discovered, and I don't think that he's anywhere near being solved. And I don't think that people really fully grasp when he is and isn't good yet. And as the meta does continue to evolve, then we will begin to see more Ivern as time progresses. But it's important to note that he is extremely fragile in the sense that if the meta changes too drastically or if any changes occur to the items, he'll be heavily hit. And so it's important to watch out for stuff like that. Jayce, this is a change that I know a lot of people were overreacting to, and it's almost Kayle syndrome-esque, where they think that this is going to be the end of Jayce. It's not. Let's not forget that the lethality changes make up for some of this damage in a sense, and also let's not forget that Jayce generally tends to overkill his targets anyway. In the sense that he doesn't need this excess damage unless he's battling specific people, and that the damage that he's losing early on is going to be virtually negligible because of how Jayce takes his trades and how he prepares for them. The only meaningful change is the Thundering Blow cost 40 mana to 55 mana. This is a little bit problematic, but again, it's nothing that can't be worked around. Q to the Sky is 40 to 240 scaling to 35 to 210 scaling. You look at it and it looks problematic, but also let's not forget that this is his committed attack. This is not his poke. Mercury Hammer. Hammer stance bonus AD ratio 0.5 to 0.25. Let's also not forget that Jayce did not even have this going back when Jayce was still being picked. When this used to be an ability power ratio. I may be wrong on this, I don't think that I am, but losing 0.15 bonus attack damage when Jayce is itemizing the items that he's building, this doesn't hit him that hard, and it's pretty laughable. So Jayce is here to stay. Don't worry about that. Don't Kayle syndrome it. And if you're unfamiliar with the term Kayle syndrome, I attribute it to when Kayle was actually nerfed and the entire community was like, oh, Riot, what are you doing? You nerfed Kayle, she'll never be played again. And then she went on to be one of the most dominating champions for the majority of a split alongside one of the old versions of Ryze, where Ryze had all the, the click and point abilities, and his R used to be the AoE and stuff. Kha'Zix, Q ratio down, evolved Q, cooldown refunded on isolated targets down. While the Assassin update delivered on giving Kha'Zix more flexibility in his evolutions, Clear may have gone too far. Kha'Zix is champion about burst damage. But Evolved Claws introduces enough sustained damage in his first fight that he's tasting the best of both worlds. Okay, so Q tastes their fear, 1.4 bonus attack damage to 1.2 bonus attack damage. Evolved Claw cooldown refund 60% on isolated targets to 45% on isolated targets. That's pretty big. This only nerfs Kha'Zix's early game, and I don't think that this is what is going to necessarily change him or remove him from the meta, so he's going to be here to stay as well, and this doesn't impact him in any way. So it's basically, this and Jayce, they seem like very soft changes, and I predict that maybe in 7.4, Riot's going to reevaluate how Jayce and Kha'Zix are performing, especially because we haven't really got to see their full effect and how they're going to interact with the lethality changes, especially because Kha'Zix benefits a lot from some of the items that do offer the lethality, and we'll have to see what that means for Kha'Zix now moving forward. Leblanc, the big bitch. So passive damage reduced to early levels. Damage level 1 through 6, 40 to 115 scaling to 30 to 80. That's pretty big. Damage level 7 to 13, 130 to 210 is now 90 to 200, okay? Damage level 14 to 18, 220 to 300 is unchanged, okay? This is big. It's not the end of the world. And the reason that I say that it's not the end of the world is because I'm viewing this from a competitive standpoint. In solo queue, this is very, very, very big, where, every small little micro amount of damage, it really does matter in a solo queue setting. In a competitive setting, Leblanc is not being picked because of this kind of, well, I mean, obviously she's being picked because she can deal a lot of damage, right? But you're not going to not pick her because she's missing 10 damage, okay? Because let's say that she siggles you 2 or 3 times. Yes, she's missing out on 30 damage or something. But I mean, there's RNG sometimes that can take place that would enable her to do pass damage in the sense of, I don't know, you get Inferno Drakes, or, you know, you're unnaturally fed, you have an extra kill, so you have an extra item that, you know, with the AP ratios or whatever, your other spells are making up for the loss of damage. And that's basically just how you have to view it. So these changes on the Kha'Zix, LeBlanc, the Jayce, I'm waiting to see Rengar. It doesn't really touch on the surface what is really problematic with these champions, and so I don't think that it really changes too much in that regard. And so the red side bans are still remaining constant in the sense of the LeBlanc and the Camille are probably still surefire red side bans. And while some teams have tried to innovate and not ban Camille, not ban Rengar, sometimes they even leave LeBlanc up, I feel like that's more so on the part of sometimes they do it on the assumption that the opponents have not practiced that. In fact, we saw that occur, I think last week. There was an interview where a team said that they intentionally left Camille up because they assumed that the opponent could never actually get to play it or pick it. And, you know, stuff like that ends up coming into play. And then we've seen the SK Telecom approach where they leave, you know, all of them up and then you trade 1 for 1. And I know that I saw Jat's, you know, breakdown of that with Pastry Time on Reddit earlier today, where he said that, you know, you give your opponent the option to decide which one they're going to take, but that still doesn't necessarily mean that you aren't prepared to take either, whereas the opponents may not be prepared to take the Rengar or to take the Camille. And so in either scenario, you still might end up coming out ahead, and I think it really just depends on team compositions, and I think that Rengar and Camille are basically the Ho-Oh and Lugia of the red side bans, and I don't even know what you would call LeBlanc. I feel like LeBlanc is the biggest no-no of them all. Right now in Korea, LeBlanc is basically forbidden. You can't really let her get through, whereas Camille and Rengar are seen as semi-acceptable, and that's just because of her versatility and her interaction with all of the current meta junglers, and just because of how strong she is in the later stages of the game. She doesn't allow really for too much response. So that's pretty much that. So here come the Malzahar changes. Voidlings are slower if they stray from Malzahar and have a small delay before spawning. W has a cooldown between casts. Voidling spawn time on cast, 0.3 seconds after cast, matching the animation. I guess I'm trying to visualize what that really means, but I guess the problem here now is as the cooldown between casts plus the cast time, that ends up causing some pretty big concerns. But fret not, in your bronze games, the Malzahars will not even be summoning the second Void Swarm, so joke's on you, Riot Games, you know what I'm talking about? They forgot they even had it. Wait for me, past 600 distance, Voidlings move 10% more slowly for every 100 or distal distance farther they are from Malzahar. Well, that's going to nerf the bronze games for sure, because now the Malzas can't just press WE and get free kills, you know what I'm talking about? But past 600 distance, Voidlings moving 10% more slowly for every 100. This is a big problem because of how Malzahar does his poke and how he trades in bottom and in mid lane, and even sometimes in top lane, because there are some players that actually do play him in top lane, although we haven't seen it competitively so far, at least not in LCK. We did see it in LCK Summer 2016, where Trace actually pulled it out twice, and it was a real potential threat. Because it does have some decent matchups. This is a really big change, and I do think this could potentially be the end of support Malzahar, but I'm not entirely sure on it. And the reason that I say that is because he's still basically going to be the same champion, levels, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and that's really where the big impact comes in a competitive setting for the Malzahar. Obviously, this change hurts him a lot more later on. And while it does hurt him early on, we can also expect that there's going to be some changes to the other popular support champions that are designed to go up against him. And so if the other support champions do end up getting hit, then the question that you propose to yourself still is, well, now do melee champs come back? And if the answer is that melee champions come back, then the Void Swarm change doesn't really hurt too much, because still in a defensive manner and in a controlled manner, it doesn't really affect him too badly. So anyways, now moving on to Rengar, Q dash distance down. Empowered W no longer gives CC immunity after cleansing, R duration down. Rengar's ability to get in and out of any skirmishes the how of the style, okay. Powered roaring cleanse, okay. Thrill of the hunt, duration, okay. Rengar can, okay. So the distance on Q savagery, dash distance 2 into 150. Not a lot of people might know this, but there's actually a very weird interaction with Rengar, where you can be at the very tip of a brush, you can Q out of it and then leap using his passive. And not a lot of people know about that. And so the change to the dash distance does definitely affect your ability to make use of that. And then obviously this is going to impact, his little ability to just move around and stuff and whatnot. And so that is really, really big. W and Battle Roar. Empowered Cast no longer gives crowd control immunity for 1.5 seconds. So does that just mean he gets the crowd control and then he loses the persist? So he no longer becomes Olaf, he just becomes Alistar. So he still has Alistar on his W, and now it's not Olaf. Thrill of the Hunt, camouflage duration, essentially unchanged at early levels. You really start to feel it at level 11 and late game. And that's where it's obviously going to be most important. It's really sickening to see Rengars in competitive play basically turn on Thrill of the Hunt, gain map hacks with their Rengar, and just run around, and you're forced to, turtle and get into a group. And it really just, it becomes a spell in itself to actually not use it. And so for the duration to be nerfed is also really big, but again, these changes I don't think really touch Rengar. It is going to make you need to be a little bit more cautious with picking him into certain team compositions. This might be enough to actually free him from being a perma red side ban, but I'm not entirely sure on that. So I don't want to make any judgment in that regard. But it definitely will affect the off-tank Rengar, but the off-tank Rengar might not even really have to be concerning itself with how that's going to interact with Rengar because of the lethality changes and the fact that Rengar does like Yumu's Ghostblade and Duskblade he synergizes extremely well with it. So there's that. Tristana, Q lasts longer. Okay, that's nice. She's still bad. Vi, movement speed and base attack speed reduced. 2017's jungle has proven pretty favorable for Vi, even with one of her stronger keystones being nerfed. As such, we're taking this opportunity to go under the hood. Well, see, this strikes me as very funny because it says that one of her keystones are nerfed, but let's be honest, Courage of the Colossus is almost always going to be better on her than Strength of the Ages, primarily because it enables her to actually build damage and still be tanky. Whereas Strength of the Ages did not enable that. Strength of the Ages gave you less than a Giant's Belt, and because it gave you less than a Giant's Belt, you could not just go Glass Cannon on Vi and rely on the proc, or just rely on the base HP. And then on top of that, it also took time to build up, where Courage of the Colossus is basically constant. Base movement speed 345 to 340. I mean, that's a fair change. Base attack speed 0.644 to 0.625. Doesn't make any sense. This can be worked around via runes and masteries, of course, but obviously that's going to negatively impact the player. I don't think that Vi is... Vi, to me, is a B-tier jungler. If we look at all the main junglers that exist right now, you have Rengar, Camille, Kha'Zix, Elise. Lee Sin is still good, although they don't pick him in LCK because doomed. I think he's like 1 in 11 there. You have Olaf, who's B-tier. You have Hecarim, who's picked extremely seldom. You have Ivern, and you have some other junglers. And with some of the champions that are being theorized and have been attempted to be brought out in response to some of the current meta picks, such as Morgana, such as Zillion, such as Lulu, etc., Vi becomes significantly worse if the enemy team ends up picking that, especially because she's bad into some of the current meta champions as well. And she hasn't reared her face at all, not in Korean solo queue and not in LCK. So this change is more so focused, I'm assuming, because of NA and EU, where I know that she is picked and I know that people do play her. But I mean, if we were to make balance changes, based on NA and EU, well, then Vladimir was absolutely busted, even though we knew that the reality of the situation last LCK summer was that Vladimir was essentially a free loss into Anivia if you preemptively picked him. And so, I don't think that that's a too good of a basis for nerfing a champion. I feel like I don't like the approach that. But before I even continue with this patch, I do want to say that I don't like the approach that a lot of stuff that I'm seeing is taking. I'm a little bit questioning why are there no buffs? Where are the buffs? Why? Where's Evelyn's buff because she now gets hurt more by the jungle camps? Where's, what happened to Skarner? What happened to Sejuani? What happened to Gragas? Is Gragas really that unhealthy of a champion because he had a high pick rate? Even though he did have a lot of skill, he had very specific animation cancels and combos that he could easily mess up, costing his team the game. Was he that problematic of a jungler that he had to be removed from the game? Where's the buffs to other champions? Where's the buff to Alawi? Where's Kled's buffs? Where are these champions that they've come out and they've basically seen almost no love? And when they do see love, it's more so, either credited to the person being really good on the champion or them winning because it's a cheese pick. Where I'm failing to understand this thought process where everything just gets nerfed and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed and nerfed, and we don't really see any buffs. I mean, I don't think that it's a coincidence that sometimes a champion gets a super minor buff and suddenly it propels them into the meta. I mean, I don't really understand. I mean, there's probably some people here that are saying, well, Tristana's Q lasts longer. Well, congratulations, right? Tristana still does not synergize with any of the big meta supports. Tristana still cannot go toe-to-toe with a lot of the current meta ADCs. That's the reality of the situation. Tristana does not benefit from the lethality changes. So now enters, the problem that there are ADCs that are in the meta right now and nothing's happening. Where is Corki, by the way? Where's Corki? I mean, if you're going to nerf Volibear because you got stomped in a silver game once upon a time, I mean, what would have happened if you were one of the victims to Apto's 45-0 on Korean solo queue? Do you just look at Corki and be like, you're not doing that to me again? Well, psych, joke's on you. He'll do it to you again with a different champion. Right? You're going to nerf that champion too? Like, I don't even understand it. And wasn't Katarina supposed to get changed this patch? Or she was supposed to get nerfed in 7.3 as well? I guess not. Okay. Vladimir. Basic attacks are stronger and faster. Q deals more baseline damage. Crimson Rush bonus reduced to compensate. Alright, well, someone just got done rewatching and re-binging apparently a True Blood series, and they got a little bit nostalgic, and they're like, you know what, I'd like to see Vladimir back in the game. So which one of you rioters was it? No, I'm kidding. But base stats, base attack damage 52 to 55. I'll be honest that I don't know this interaction with last hitting minions underneath turret. So I'm not going to comment on that, but maybe that has a very specific interaction. And I just don't know it. It certainly helps him up in top lane, where he is very, very rarely picked in Korean solo queue. But it does certainly help him against some of the melee champions, because if we assume that Vladimir auto-attacks his opponent, let's just say 30 times in a laning phase, and then, you factor in reduction or whatever. I mean, that's still a pretty big chunk of HP that an opponent is now missing for free. Q transfusion, 0.55 ability power to 0.6 ability power. Okay. Damage 75 to 135 is now changed to 80 to 160. Crimson Rush bonus damage. He loses the bonus damage. So it basically, I mean, the build up and the wind up is going to be a little bit better. The basic attack missile speed also going up is really nice. That probably makes things a lot smoother. And then obviously the bonus damage being reduced is, yeah, that's interesting. I don't think this is going to propel him back into the meta necessarily, but I think that he still does exist as a very specific and pocket counterpick in some situations. So I think that the changes are kind of nice, but I don't think that they're in the right direction. Okay, Zyra. Plants don't auto-target champions on spawn if a closer enemy target exists. Q costs more mana. Okay, so Deadly Spine, 60 to 70 mana. I'm not exactly sure that's going to really change anything about her Deadly Spines. I mean, obviously taking, a hit to Q can be problematic, especially at the rate at which she spams it. But I don't think that it can't be worked around via either runes or masteries, because Zyra does already have pretty unique runes and masteries in the first place, and I don't think that it's going to hurt her too much to change a little bit, not especially when we factor in that one of the other major supports inside of Malzahar was just recently hit. I think that the change, however, that the plants don't auto-target champions on a spawn if a closer enemy target exists, I think that's really, really big. So now she has to be a little bit more skillful with her poke and harass, and it's not going to be as brain dead. But I still think that she should see use in pro play, but she'll definitely be brought down a notch, very similar to Malzahar being brought down a notch. And what that ends up meaning is that one of the major things that you might notice is that Karma remains untouched, and so now Karma ends up getting propelled, right back to the #1 seat most likely in the support role. And the other thing is that Misfortune goes untouched, and I'm assuming that Misfortune goes untouched because of Misfortune's ability to actually respond to the Zyra and the Malzahar. So Practice Tool will be rolling out region by region on the updated client later during patch 7.3. In the meantime, you can learn more about the Practice Tool here. This is really, really, really good. I just wish that they would enable, multiple people to join in on the games. Rotating game mode, okay. Bug fixes. I'm not actually going to go over this right now, but probably nice that, there are bug fixes. The Blood Moon skins, absolutely fantastic. Go out there and get some of these skins, okay? But just actually do you and your solo queue teammates a favor and don't play any of the champions. Just get it for, aesthetic purposes when you want to play in normals, all right? But for the most part, and I say that also because some of these champions are just not that good right now, okay? End conclusion is that I don't think that the patch is really that good. I hope that 7.4 brings a lot of changes. I want to see a lot of buffs in 7.4. The red side bans I don't think are hit. The only thing that might potentially end up occurring is that Rengar gets let through more often. I don't think that Camille or Leblanc are ever going to be allowed off of that red side ban, at least not right now, or at least not if other changes don't end up occurring. Such as, mid laners end up returning, or buffs to other mid laners or buff to other top laners that can deal with Camille a little bit better. Because right now I know that Korea is struggling very hard to find a proper counter to her, and no one can really find it. Shen does fairly well against her early on. Jax can beat her, but in the reality it's still like a 60-40. And, other champions just don't do that well. I've heard some people say that actually Tom beats Camille, but the sad reality of the situation is that even if he beats her, he still loses in the end, because Tahm Kench is not a champion that you really want to put up in the top lane in the current meta. And with just, the changes that indirectly did hurt him in terms of certain items. For instance, the Zyra actually getting changed ends up hurting him, because that's one of the ways that he could still be useful in pro play while not compromising his team, because he doesn't split push very effectively unless he itemizes a very specific way. I think that it's very interesting that Ryze is not touched, and I feel like they're just being extremely careful because, again, they didn't have information when they made 7.2. They have a little bit of information on 7.3, and now we're going to really need to see what 7.4 brings to the table, because I assume that'll be the first really big patch of Season 7. And it's going to need to be a big one, because by that time, what are we entering? We're entering into week 6 or week 5 or something. And we need to see some sort of a change, because if you just let the meta go the way that it is right now, while there's a lot of champions in a sense, there's really not, because some just clearly outshine others and they're just clearly more useful. And even in a solo queue sense, I think that it would be okay to buff champions for competitive if they're going to have a little bit of a negative impact on solo queue, but that's an entirely different issue. So that's pretty much it on the patch 7.3 rundown. And yeah, I'm not super impressed with the patch. I like some things, but for the majority, I dislike it. And I think that it's really over-exaggerated if people really think that Jayce and Camille are hit in any way. Rengar is the most significant hit that this patch ended up having. It's either going to be Rengar or it's going to be Zyra or Malzahar. It depends how you look at it. And I think that's it for the patch 7.3 rundown. So I hope you enjoyed it. All right.